So just when I think I have heard every way that survivors of these relationships could be shamed, I hear yet another. So my morning doom scrolling means reading the news. And more tellingly than the news are the comment sections. The news is bad enough. But where I really learn what people in narcissistic relationships are up against as they heal is definitely the comment sections. Because it's here that ordinary folks, since most of us are not journalists or close to journalists who aren't edited, make their opinions, unfettered opinions, known. And one comment I recently read in particular caught my interest, because it sort of encapsulated to me why so many survivors feel so shut down, despite the encouragement from some people to talk it out. I forget that there may be many more invalidating than validating voices out there. The article itself that I was reading was talking about things, books, articles, whatever, that people should read to learn about mental health. Like they were like sort of first-person stories about mental health. Ironically, almost all of the stories they highlighted were about the types of mental health stories that feel more comfortable or accessible. People who had a diagnosed mental illness themselves, such as depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, maybe addiction, things like that were on the list. Ultimately, what it got at is that these were people who were telling, for example, their story of depression from the point of view of the person who has depression, person who has schizophrenia. It's more of like a disease model telling of mental health. And I had read some of the books and things on the list. They were powerful and good books. But one thing that was completely missing from the list was books by or about people who had experienced things like domestic abuse or violence, interpersonal trauma by people they knew, and trusted people such as family, or emotional abuse or intergenerational abuse, and there sure as hell weren't any on narcissistic abuse. None of that was represented on this list. We don't like stories about mental health that implicate the behaviors of other people. And we definitely don't like it when that abuse doesn't meet some threshold that somehow society deems should be met. Physical abuse, severe enough sexual abuse. It has to be bad enough for the general audience to be willing to clock it as trauma. What we don't want to account for is that the accumulative daily betrayals, invalidations, criticism, subjugation, and denial of reality that a person endures in any kind of abusive or narcissistic relationship, whether in childhood or adulthood, is harmful. It's betrayal trauma. It's a relational trauma. And as such, as a field in mental health and psychology and in the mainstream, don't want to recognize any of this. If a person thinks their parent was toxic or their spouse is emotionally abusive, we are more likely to criticize the person who is being emotionally abused for being so dismissive or not understanding that there are 2 points of view in a relationship or that everyone has different ways of expressing anger than we are to clock this emotionally abusive pattern as harmful, really harmful, and having very real mental health impacts. We want tidy mental illness stories. So back to the comment section. The comment that led me to stop reading and put the damn device down and feed the cat was when one person's comment was they were recommending a really great book about a woman's experience with complex trauma. And then another commenter replied to that comment and said, "Oh no, everyone I know who reads these books about complex trauma just become navel-gazing complainers who just want to talk about their trauma, or that they have had to disengage from family members, or want to talk about what they are still trying to manage." And then that commenter goes on to say that everything just melts into that person, the other person who has complex trauma self-absorption. I have no doubt that many of you have someone in your life who has said something like this to you, or at least had a sort of sneery, eye-rolling vibe around you. These are the very people who don't want your relationship to be just superficial, like your friendship with them. But when you do share something vulnerable with them, then you are navel-gazing, self-absorbed, therapy-speaking fools. And it may be that some folks really only want superficial conversations. My guess is that the commenter on that article may prefer maybe that the conversation only be about her. But when I saw that comment, after I got past the anger, I really felt sad. Who knows what her problem is? But she represented what I know many other people have shared with me. You can share about yourself, but don't share so much that I'm uncomfortable. And make sure you get along with your family and then talk about pleasant stuff and only talk about stuff I want. It's no wonder that relationships can feel fraught for survivors of narcissistic relationships. Because especially if you are still in the narcissistic relationship or just getting out of it, you are confused. Relationships are already messed up places. Places that only work if you give up on yourself, be what the other person wants, shape yourself to their reality and what they want. Just figuring out how to be in new relationships can be really challenging for people who are healing. You sometimes find yourself sort of going back and forth between oversharing and undersharing, between opening up and finding you can't stop, to feeling numb and silenced. And knowing that there are people out there who sit in sneering judgment that you are selfishly navel-gazing because you're sharing about yourself, and that the ruminating voices sometimes just need to come out of you, and that most of you are just looking for a safe place to land or share, that comment was the height of selfishness. And yet, when survivors encounter someone who takes that kind of stance, like that commenter, oh God, again, you're going to go talk about going no contact with your mother or about your husband's gaslighting, sarcasm optional. Once again, you have entered a relationship where you are told, please don't burden me with your stuff. I guess I'm just sharing with you what you have already, I am sure, experienced many times. The world can feel like a whole lot of damned if you do, damned if you don't when you are in one of these relationships. The challenge is knowing that this is not everyone, but sifting through it all and finding the safe spaces is not easy, and it can feel impossible and demoralizing. Other people's discomfort, contempt, and disdain for your pain, for your situation, and for the things that you have had to endure in these relationships doesn't mean that your experience isn't important. It's because that other person lacks empathy or capacity. And once again, we are back at the fundamental truth when it comes to these relationships and how the world regards people who are stuck in something that they never asked for. You got to keep remembering, it's not you. Finding new friends and new social supports is never easy. But paying attention to this kind of dismissiveness and learning with whom you can show up as your whole self can transform this experience from cutting off parts of yourself to valuing yourself enough to recognize that some people just aren't worthy of getting to see your whole you. And that is their loss. Thanks again.